Hi, I'm Ada. My group will be covering audience analysis. I'll be covering understanding situational characteristics. So that means reacting to your audience and also to be prepared for any kind of audience that you may receive. So for, let's say, a smaller audience, for a smaller audience, you can basically fine-tune what you're going to say and be as specific as possible in order to engage with them, in order to have a deeper connection. With a larger audience, I would definitely suggest being as broad as possible to be able to cover and connect with as many diverse groups of people as possible. Also, another thing to consider is time. So work with what you got, whether it's a couple minutes to half an hour to an hour, you can make it worth your audience's time. So with less time, you just have to be as short, as concise, and as bold as possible in order to leave an impact with your audience and to be able to create an actual message that they can take away. So if you have more time, you can definitely start to craft and put more personality into your speeches. But you do have to be careful not to trail. You have to be careful not to distract from your main point that you work so hard to deliver. Also, location is really important. Just has to go with being mindful of prep work. So let's say a checklist of things you have. Are you visible to your audience? As in, are there any blockades? Is the lighting distracting? Something else to consider that a lot of people, inexperienced speakers, don't consider is noise distractions. So is there a loud vent? Is your audio equipment working? Can you project? Those are all really important. And sometimes you need to physically just check these things off. Mentally at least. And so another thing that is probably more for the advanced speakers is to consider the mobility of your audience. Is it stationary, sort of like A to B? Me being A, the speaker, you being B, the audience, just being stationary, kind of like in a classroom environment? Or is it like a mobile audience where you're doing a demonstration in a public park and you have to be engaging with people? Now, you may think that a stationary audience might be easier, and in some ways it is, but you can't take for granted their attention. So maybe you might want to pace, you might want to use large hand gestures, you might want to be, throwing some jokes, still be engaging, throwing some personality in there regardless. The next section I'll be moving on to is the situational audience analysis, as in you're reacting now. So you prepared as much as you could. Now you have to consider, you show up, you're on stage. What if the audience isn't what you expected? If so, number one rule, don't act surprised. Don't let the audience read you, because then in that way you might look unprepared, even though you spent hours on your speech. What if the audience isn't interested? What if they're fidgeting? What if, there's like side, conversations going on? If so, just reconsider a new approach to the message you want to give. Give a different part of your personality. See how it takes. You're reacting, which is important and what really does make a good speaker or an efficient speaker. What if the audience is in disagreement with you? You can tell how they're reacting negatively to what you're saying. Just try rephrasing what you're trying to say at that point. And just commit to your message and just believe your message. What if we go back to boredom and gestures in audience, which is really, really probably the most common. And if that is the case, just be humorous. And again, the most important part, bring your personality out. Moving on, we'll have Nadia on.
Hi, my name is Nadia, and I will be discussing with you incorporating demographics. It has been said that great public speakers use the knowledge of their listeners' demographic characteristics to understand the people they are addressing and to make their messages more effective. Remember, all audiences are unique. To gain insight on how an audience might respond to your message, start by identifying shared characteristics of the listeners. Then, incorporate those insights into the development and framing of your speech. In this segment, I will briefly explore examples, suggestions, and strategies on how to address and incorporate demographics into the preparation of your speech. Our first characteristics are age, gender, and sexual orientation or sexuality. While all three are very different, in one way or another, each relate to how we view ourselves. Age is important to consider when selecting examples and quotations for your speech. Your choices should be recognizable across a range of generations. For example, older listeners may not understand a reference to rapper Travis Scott, while younger listeners may not understand a reference to broadcast journalist Diane Sawyer. Both are well known amongst their generation, but For them to be impactful to every audience member, you must use more than just their names. Include what they do, how they do it, and why it's important. This is how you can create context for your listeners. Gender composition is important to consider when selecting stories, illustrations, or examples. Some may resonate better with one gender grouping than the other. However, never assume that because of an audience member's gender, you know their views. And, in all cases, try to stay away from any gender stereotypes or sexist language when addressing your audience. Phrases such as all men are unorganized or all women are great housekeepers are sexist, which makes them poor examples that should not be used in a speech. Sexual orientation has also become increasingly more important when considering audience members. Sexual orientation includes straight or heterosexual men and women, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, and non-gender identifying individuals, or LGBTQ for short. Some suggestions would be to use examples that include same-sex couples or parents, and to be inclusive with your word choice. Avoid language that privileges one sexual orientation over another. An example of inclusive word choice would be using the phrase loving partners instead of married couples. This invites every listener into the conversation. It is ethically responsible, strategic, and smart for a speaker to acknowledge members of the LGBTQ community in preparation for their speech. Race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status also determine the way we view ourselves and how we view each other. Your audience is likely to have a wide variety of racial and ethnic origins. It's important to remember that even though race is a socially constructed concept, it refers to a common heritage based on genetically shared physical characteristics of people in a group, whereas ethnicity refers to cultural background that is usually associated with shared religion, natural origin, and language. Both race and ethnicity shape beliefs, attitudes, and values of audience members. In order to accommodate such diversity, speak to the various interests and diverse backgrounds of your listeners, but do not generalize. Socioeconomic status may influence individual or collective concerns of the audience and is thus worth considering. Socioeconomic status is a measure of where individuals in terms of, Socioeconomic status is a measure of where individuals stand in terms of financial resources, education, and occupation in relation to other individuals. Religious orientation and political affiliation are our final demographics that we will discuss. A person's set of religious beliefs is their religious orientation. For some people, religious orientation strongly shapes their views on a wide range of issues. Like any other demographic, religious orientation can exercise great influence on an audience. However, it does not predetermine their reaction to a given message. The same can be said about political affiliation. But political affiliation is considered the most difficult of the demographic characteristics to pin down. This is because traditional labels are broad, and members of the audience who identify with a specific label may not necessarily agree with all of the views of that label. All of the demographics we've discussed are essential in preparing a strong and effective presentation. This intentional effort is sure to assist you in the framing of a strong, effective message for your audience. When we take time to research and understand the potential demographics that will be present in an audience, we increase the chances of audience receiving our message. And that's all for introducing demographics. And next up, we'll have Jelani.
Hi, my name is Andrea, and I'll be explaining to you sharing common grounds. There are two different ways to get your audience There are two different ways to grab your audience attentions, which are verbal way and nonverbal way. In the verbal way, the first one is sharing common belief, values, and experience with your audience. In this one, start by finding out as much as you can about the people you'll be addressing. Ask your contact to put you in touch with a few of the people that you'll be attending of your presentation. Try to see the issue from the various perspectives and identity that overlaps. Look what your potential listeners have in common in questions, concerns, and what they will find valuable. Finding this common ground will allow you to craft the core message that will speak to your audience. There is also gaining credibility. There is a lot of your audience that may have like odd or misconception or an inaccurate information. When you are speaking to with your audience, you may uncover some of these false assumptions. You need to listen carefully to what people are saying and not saying. Try to understand the backstory. If you can clear up misconception, it can help audience members to see how their various interests align. And in the nonverbal way, there is like sharing same identities with listeners. Once you know what your audience members have in common, you can craft your message in a way that makes each listener feel that you get him or her. Use stories or metaphors that everyone can relate to. For example, using a symbol that represents the audience you are having. This will give them an idea that you are trying to connect with them. These techniques are essential to get your audience attention in a way to success giving your speech. It's better to be prepared for your speech to look more professional and authentic. When you connect with all the listeners, you have done your job and brought them to a point of shared understanding. They get it because you have found the common ground. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jelani. I'm here to talk about identifying prior exposure. So, getting a speech or a lecture that you heard before can be very boring and make you uninterested in the topic. But this is a problem that speakers deal with when they analyze their audience. So to not deal with that, you have to ask yourself 3 questions. The first question is, has my audience heard the message? If no, then your audience has no prior exposure and you can do whatever with your message. And all you want to do is just make sure you tell the most important topics in basic terms. If yes, you want to move to the next question, which is, has my audience responded positively to the message? If you see people on their phone and they're not engaged, then that's not a good response that you want from your audience. If yes, they're responding positive, then you can use a new speech to reinforce the message. If no, then you want to avoid what you did in the previous message to make sure that you get a better response. And you want to move to the next question is, why did my previous message fail? Try to figure out what went wrong in the last speech, then use those results to make changes for it to be more successful. Remember, it's always good to ask questions while giving out your speech. Also, your audience could have had a change in perspective, so that's something that you should consider when giving your speech. So just ask yourself these 3 questions when you're trying to analyze your audience to identify prior exposure with them. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Nahum, and I'm going to be talking about what's audience disposition. Audience disposition is divided into 3 categories, which are sympathetic, hostile, and neutral audience. For a sympathetic audience, this type of audience agrees with your message, so your audience supports your speech, whichever speech you're giving. You do not need to have, you don't have to convince your audience about accepting your speech since already agrees with you. For a hostile audience, this type of audience opposes your message and it resists to listen to it because it has a different point of view from yours. So for a hostile audience, you really need to have a well-defined goal, so your speech is well given and you are able to convince your audience in receiving your message. Why? Because since it's a hostile audience, they resist to listen to you. So your main goal is to try to make them, change the way they see your point of view and reconsider whatever they think about it. And then the third one is neutral. So neutral audience has neither a negative or positive point of view towards your message. So this kind of audience might be apathetic, interested, or just doesn't care much about your speech. So for this type of audience, you have to try to get involved with the audience and try to identify what's your audience also, so you somehow can make a connection to it and they can get interested in listening to your message and receiving your point of view. That's it for now. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Thomas Powers, and today we're going to be discussing ways and methods you can obtain information on your audience. Those three methods I'd like to discuss are surveying, interviews, and observation. I'd like to start with surveys. Surveys can take the form of fixed response questions, and these can be true or false, multiple choice questions, or allow you to gain a concrete insight into your audience's understanding of the topic. And next we have range response questions, and these usually take the form of 1 to 10 or intensity-based multiple choice questions and are great for measuring the understanding of an audience's on your topic. And finally, I'd like to talk about open-ended questions. These are great for giving the audience a chance to have an individual, nuanced response to your speech, to your question. And it's great for getting answers to questions you might have left out in your initial multiple choice or ranged questions. Next, I'd like to talk about interviews. Interviews are great for a speech, not only because they'll break the ice and give you the chance to get information and stories, facts that you might have left out from the surveys, but it also gives you a chance to see who in the audience, what your composition of the audience is, and who you're speaking to. And finally, I'd like to cover observation. Observation is key if you do not have the logistic or the time capacity to set up surveys or interviews. And it gives you the opportunity to step back and look at your audience and check its composition, see if you can make changes to your speech, and whether or not you have looked into the literature of your audience properly. You can take time before your speech to check the pamphlets or brochures that are being passed out in the hallways or the venue prior to your speech to get an understanding of your audience's views prior to your speech. That's about all the time we have left today. I'd like to thank you.